Hey creepy fam, welcome to part 2 of my Kaylee and Casey Anthony case video. If you have not seen part 1, please go ahead and refer to the first link in the description box down below. I will also try and link it up above. That way you guys are caught up to speed on all of the brand new information that I presented in yesterday's video, in Monday's video. So that's all you should know. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to subscribe and let's get into part 2. They did not know that there had been a keyword search for foolproof suffocation. Forget chloroform, chlorophyll, whatever, neck breaking, all this other stuff that we're gonna get into that came up in trial. Foolproof suffocation. Those two words, I don't know if foolproof is one or two words, but those words were never brought up in trial to the jury. And let me tell you, once they knew about this after the trial was said and done, and because of double jeopardy, Casey can never be tried for manslaughter of her daughter, child neglect, or a murder, capital murder, because she's already been found not guilty. We already know this. This is not news. I'm just going over the trial again with you guys. Yeah. I really feel like that right there would have changed at least some of the jurors' minds. So some more timeline facts. So Casey was first arrested on July 16th, 2008, like I said, but not before she had time to delete her entire browser history. We've already gone over that. So the day after she was arrested, which was July 17th, 2008, she was charged officially with giving false statements to law enforcement, child neglect, and obstruction of a criminal investigation. Judge did deny Casey bail at first because he said that she had willful disregard for the authorities and basically her child that was missing. Then on July 22nd, 2008, after a bond hearing, the judge finally did set a bail of $500,000, which was paid for by a somewhat famous bail bondsman named Leonard Padilla, and I guess he bailed her out in hopes of helping to try and find the little girl alive and well. So let's get into some information that you guys probably didn't know about. So remember, Casey finally admitted that Kaylee was missing for 31 days on July 15th. So July 15th is when Kaylee Marie Anthony was finally reported missing. Now, on August 11th, 12th, and 13th, 2008, a meter reader of the name of Rory Kronk called the police 3 different times, and he called about a suspicious object he had found in a forested area near the Anthony residence. So in the first instance, he was told to call the sheriff's office tip line, and then that they would reach out to him, and apparently they never did. So on the second instance, he did call the sheriff's office again. Now this time they sent 2 police officers out to the area where he said he thought he had found a skull. So he literally told the police officers that he found what he thought to be a gray skull in an area within walking distance to the Anthony home. They did a short search of the area and came up with nothing. According to Rory Kronk, he says that they seemed a little upset with him and irritated, and basically like it was a waste of finite resources. So this is back in August, okay? So keep in mind, had they found Kaylee's body that day, there probably would have been more forensic evidence that had not been disintegrated by December, when the body was eventually found. On that occasion, the officer conducted a short search and stated he did not see anything. Then finally, on December 11th, 2008, Kronk again called the police. So now this is 4 times. I thought it was only 3 times. 4 times. And this time, I guess he did say he actually took his meter stick and poked the skull. He didn't know it was a skull. I guess at first he thought it was a Halloween mask, realized that it was indeed a human skull, and phoned the police again. This time they did come out. They searched and found the remains of a child in a trash bag, and the trash bag was also inside a laundry bag. Now, this is something also that I didn't know, but the laundry bag, I think this was in the trial, but the laundry bag is a laundry bag that came in a set of 3, and the Anthonys had 2 of the exact same make and model of this laundry bag that was sold in sets of 3. They had 2 of 3. So that right there is kind of circumstantial evidence to me, I would think, but circumstantial, I guess. Investigative teams recovered duct tape that was hanging around from Kaylee's hair and some tissue left on her skull. Over the next 4 days, more bones were found in the wooded area near the spot where the remains initially had been discovered. So on December 19th, 2008, the medical examiner named Jan Garvaganglia confirmed that the remains did indeed belong to the 2.5-year-old little girl, and America's heart broke. I mean, everybody kind of assumed that that was little Kaylee, but it was confirmed on December 19th. Here's the strange thing also about this. So the medical examiner ruled Kaylee's death as a homicide, okay? That's her ruling. She's the medical examiner. She has experience doing this. But she was unable to determine the cause of death. This was one of the biggest problems the jury had. This is one of the reasons the jury had issues with finding Casey guilty of capital murder and manslaughter, is because while they said that little Kaylee's death was ruled a homicide, which means somebody murdered her, so the medical examiner is saying, yes, this child died because of a murder. Somebody killed her. Yet I'm unable to tell you how she was murdered. So in my mind, if I was on the jury, I too would be like, well, how do you know she was murdered if you can't tell me how she died? Do you know what I mean? So then that leaves it into, you know, you have to judge somebody beyond a reasonable doubt. That puts doubt in the jury's mind. If you are going to tell me that somebody was murdered, I want to know how they died. Otherwise, how do you know it was a murder? How do you know she didn't have an accident in the pool like the defense said at one point during the trial? How do we know that didn't actually occur? How do we know that some other person didn't like strangle her? Like, there's so many things. How do we know that it was suffocation? How do we know that it had to do with chloroform? Now, don't get me wrong, I 100% believe that Casey had something to do with her daughter's death. I'm not defending her at all. But when the jury is instructed to go deliberate and basically come to a conclusion on what someone's fate is, they are told they have to find a person guilty beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt. And if I was on that jury, I would have somewhat of a doubt. Do you know what I mean? Simply because the medical examiner was not able to tell them how she was murdered. So I think a lot of the wording and the fact that the prosecution pushed for capital murder so hard and the death penalty, I think that could have probably been avoided if they would have pushed more for manslaughter or like second-degree murder or something like that. I don't know. How do we know? Do you know what I mean? So the fact that she said the way the child was murdered was undetermined, but it was definitely a homicide, I have to tell you, a lot of the jury members that did speak out, they said that was one of the biggest reasons why they could not consciously convict Casey Anthony of murder, because they couldn't even be told how the child was murdered. On July 29th, 2008, Casey Anthony was offered a limited immunity deal by the prosecution related to the false statements given to law enforcement about locating her child, which was renewed on August 25th to expire on August 28th. So she did not take this plea deal. On September 5th, 2008, she was released again on bail on all pending charges after being fitted with an electronic tracking device. If you don't know what that is, it's a device that goes on your ankle and basically allows you, I think, to stay within a certain distance. Usually it's just home arrest so that you're not fleeing the country and trying to get away with some sort of crime that you committed. On October 14th, 2008, Casey Anthony was indicted by a grand jury of 19 people. She was indicted on charges of first-degree murder, child abuse, aggravated manslaughter on a child, and 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. She was later arrested, and Judge John Jordan ordered that she be withheld without bond. On October 21st, 2008, the charges of child neglect were dropped against Casey according to the state's attorney's office because the evidence proved that the child was deceased. And on October 28th, Casey Anthony pled not guilty to all charges. Then on April 13th, 2009, much to a lot of people's shock, the prosecution declared that they were seeking the death penalty with this trial against Casey Anthony. And this shocked a lot of people because it's not very common for women to be facing the death penalty, especially in cases against, you know, like murdering their own child. I don't know. It was just like, most of America was happy about this, but it was pretty shocking to hear, especially considering the fact that a lot of people that were talking about this case, different attorneys and whatnot, while they said they had a lot of circumstantial evidence, they didn't seem that they had enough evidence to go for the death penalty. And I do kind of believe that that's another thing that ultimately swayed the jury the other way, because they wanted the death penalty and they could have just asked more for like a guilty verdict on manslaughter or child neglect. But like I said in the closing statements, you can watch the entire trial. Obviously, we know the outcome. She was found not guilty on all charges except for providing false statements to the police.
As to case number 2008 CF 15606-0. As to the charge of first-degree murder, verdict as to count 1, we the jury find the defendant not guilty, so say we all. As to the charge of aggravated child abuse, verdict as to count 2, we the jury find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of aggravated manslaughter of a child, verdict as to count 3, we the jury find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, verdict as to count 4. We the jury find the defendant guilty of providing false information to a law enforcement officer as charged in the indictment.
You can watch the entire trial online. I mean, it's all over the internet. And like I said, the reason I'm doing this way is because this video is different. This is me introducing just new evidence that I learned while doing research about this case, which we've covered most of it already. So basically at the trial, there were 26,000 pages of discovery, over 400 pieces of evidence, and 90 weeks and 33 days of trial. A strand of hair was recovered from the trunk, like I said, and they said it was microscopically similar to hair taken from Kaylee's hairbrush, and that the strand showed root banding in which hair roots form a dark band after death, which is consistent with hair from a dead body. But like I said to you, we're able to produce that same effect on people that are still alive, on their hair. So to me, that wasn't strong enough evidence, and the jury also didn't believe that was strong enough evidence. So Kronk, who discovered the remains, repeated the same story to the jury. Basically, the reason he did discover the remains, I forgot to mention, but I think we all know, is basically he had to urinate, he had to relieve himself, and I guess he was en route. You know, he was a meter reader. He knew an area where it was safe to urinate, I guess. And I guess this area, by the way, the area where Kaylee was left, basically, a lot of people would throw trash there. I didn't know that until I watched some of these newer documentaries, but I had no idea that this was actually a site where there were other trash bags and other pieces of garbage and whatnot. So I was under the impression that she was just, you know, put somewhere deep in the woods, but no, she was, I think, 17 feet away from an actual road, like a busy road. So that's kind of crazy to me too. And I think it's weird that he called 4 times and it took 4 times for the police to come and finally say, oh yeah, this is a dead body. This is a skull. Also, on October 24th, 2008, a forensic report by Aprid Vass at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory judged that results from an air sampling procedure, which they took from the trunk of Casey's car, showed chemical compounds consistent with a decompositional event based on the presence of 5 key chemical compounds out of 400 possible chemical compounds that Vass's research group considers typical of decomposition. Investigators stated that the trunk smelled strongly of human decomposition, but human decomposition was not specified on the laboratory scale. The process has not been affirmed by a de Boer test in the courts, and Vass's group also stated that there was chloroform in the car trunk. So going to the chloroform, now this is something that I learned in one of the documentaries. Apparently, there was a huge part of Casey's trunk missing, like the interior lining, I guess, was missing. I'm sorry if I'm getting that incorrect. There's so much information going on in my head. There was something to do with a car part within the car in the trunk that basically the glue within this part of the trunk that came with the car, it has a chemical that is exactly the same as chloroform within the glue. It's like the same thing. It has like the same chemical structure or compound as chloroform, so it can be misconstrued as chloroform. So basically, the chloroform that they found could very well have just came from part of the glue that came with the car in the back, in the trunk. Does that make sense? Like basically, it wasn't necessarily chloroform that Casey made. Also, the prosecution said that there were 84 searches for the word chloroform on the home computer, but it turns out it was only 4. There were only actually 4 searches, and Cindy, Casey's mom, said that she was responsible for that because she was actually looking up chlorophyll, something to do with her garden, a different word, and allegedly she misspelled it, and so chloroform came up. And sometimes I do know that if you type in something enough times, your computer will autocorrect it to what it thinks it is, and basically they were saying it was like a mistake. And in the Amazon documentary, they go to a scientist again and they ask, how easy is it? Can somebody go online and get the ingredient list on how to make chloroform? And yes, you and I could both Google right now how to make chloroform. I don't suggest you do it because that's how you get put on, those lists. I definitely don't need to be on that. It is so difficult to actually create chloroform. One of the theories is that Casey didn't actually want to murder Kaylee, but it happened by accident. And that basically she would sedate Kaylee with chloroform at night so that she could go out and go party, and that Kaylee would sleep at home alone. Basically, she would not bother Casey, so Casey could party and live her life and be hanging out with guys and all this other stuff. And people are saying that that could be the case because apparently within the 31 days when Kaylee was missing, but truly she was deceased at this point, there's video surveillance of her at Blockbuster, hanging all over her boyfriend at the time. There's photos of her doing a hot body contest. I think she even won. Again, I don't know what was going through her mind. I don't know what happened to Kaylee. People sometimes compartmentalize trauma in their life in different ways in their head. I talked about this in a video I did recently. I did a mukbang and mental health kind of video. A lot of people deal with trauma by compartmentalizing things, and that's the way they're able to act quote unquote normal. But I don't know what was going through Casey's mind when she was doing all of these things while her daughter was allegedly either dead, that she knew about because either it happened in a pool accident, because like you guys know, if you know anything about this case, which I'm sure you do, another thing the defense said was that not only was Casey molested by her father, I mentioned this, but they only mentioned it in the beginning, kind of like a red herring to just put that in the jury's head, I think. But they also said that on that day, on July 16th, Casey was asleep, George walks in with Kaylee in his arms and says, hey, there's been an accident. She got into the pool by herself, and because she loved to swim and she did have access to the pool, she could open that gate herself. She drowned, and they got scared and they just assumed that somebody would be held liable for this, for, you know, for child neglect or something, or not having the right pool gate. And so he's like, I'll take care of it. And he's the one, allegedly, they put this all on him. And they said that allegedly he got rid of Kaylee's body. And the reason that Casey was lying so much to authorities was because she had learned to do this since she was a 7-year-old little girl that had to basically perform fellatio on her father and then go play with the students at school on the playground that same morning. That's what they tried to say. That was in the opening statement of the defense. I'm sorry. And basically that's why they're saying that there was odor in the car of a decomposing body. Here's the hole in that theory is George was a retired police officer. If anybody is gonna know how to dispose of a body, it's gonna be a police officer. I just feel like if anybody was going to do it and he was the one that did it, he would definitely, like, we would not be talking about this case today. She would still be considered just a missing child. You know what I mean? Because I feel like a police officer would know exactly what not to do. And they certainly wouldn't have abandoned the car with that stench in the vehicle if that's the case. And then it doesn't make sense. To me, that theory doesn't make any sense at all. I don't know. I hope he didn't do that to his daughter. I really hope he didn't molest and or rape Casey. There was also some theories that she said she was trying to keep Kaylee away from George because she didn't want him to also harm her the way he allegedly molested her. So it was in October of 2009 where officials released 700 pages of documents related to the Anthony investigation, including records of Google searches of the term neck breaking and how to make chloroform. But I already told you that Cindy took responsibility for the chloroform, and there was not in fact 84 separate searches. It was all done on the same day, and it was just like because it was the same website being visited, if that makes sense. It wasn't necessarily 84 different times instances where someone sat down and was like, how to make chloroform. So the reason Cindy said that there was this so-called search for neck breaking on the computer was because she was looking up something else online, and apparently there was a pop-up for a YouTube video of a skater, a guy on a skateboard who accidentally did some kind of skateboarding trick and snapped his neck. And I guess she had clicked on, you know, that little pop-up video, and that was all that really had anything to do with the neck breaking search. And then we've already discussed the chloroform and also why there might be chloroform in the trunk. Here's another thing. According to detectives, at the crime scene, there was a heart-shaped sticker. Now the media went crazy with this. They went absolutely wild when they discovered that there had been duct tape around Kaylee's mouth. And the defense, or the prosecution, had said the only reason that duct tape would even be there would be to suffocate a child. But there's no proof that the duct tape was there before or after she was deceased. But they said, why else would you put this on a child other than the fact to suffocate them? And they said that hopefully she was sedated prior to the suffocation out of mercy. And that's what the prosecution said. But apparently there was also a heart-shaped sticker found on the duct tape over the mouth of Kaylee's skull. But this was just an example of the media running with basically nothing, because this was not part of the evidence. This, in fact, was not true. There was not a heart-shaped sticker anywhere on the duct tape. That was just that was totally ruled out, and the media went wild. They ran wild with it and just went crazy. And it just goes to show you mob mentality. It's not always right. I'm just saying, like, the laboratory was not able to capture a heart-shaped photographically after some duct tape was subjected to dye testing. There was a blanket found at the crime scene that had like Winnie the Pooh on it, and it was very well known that Kaylee loved Winnie the Pooh. So whoever laid her in that area in the bag within the laundry tote, they did have her wrapped in Winnie the Pooh blanket, which did come from the grandparents' house. The lead prosecutor in the case was Assistant State Attorney Linda Drain Burdick. Assistant State's Attorney Frank George and Jeff Ashton completed the prosecution team. And lead counsel for the defense was Jose Baez, who was pretty new at the time. Nobody believed he was going to win this case. They didn't think he would even be able to go to trial with this case because of his lack of experience. Apparently he sold bikinis prior to doing this. That's what somebody said somewhere. And also including with that were Florida criminal defense attorneys J. Cheney Mason, Dorothy Clay Sims, and Ann Fennell served as co-counsel. During the trial, attorney Mark Lipman represented George and Cindy Anthony. Jury selection began on May 9th, 2011, and they knew they were gonna have a very difficult time getting an unbiased jury because this was all over the news. Everybody knew who Top Mom was. And I think the prosecution truly believed they had a hole-in-one or whatever, so to speak, because everybody, you would ask like a mock jury, everyone thought that for sure. Like everybody said she was guilty. Like they said, they characterized Casey Anthony as a party girl. In fact, during that time, she got a tattoo also. You guys have all heard of this infamous tattoo. That's the words Bella Vita, which means beautiful life in French. The tattoo artist even went on trial as a witness, and he said that she did not seem sad at the time. But then Jose Baez tried to spin it as, well, what do people do when people pass away? They get in memory of tattoos of some form or another. And so he tried to say that in her own way, Casey got this tattoo basically in honor of the beautiful life that Kaylee did have when she was alive, and that basically Kaylee was every single thing to her mother, Casey. I don't want to go over too much more. Everything else is stuff that we know. Like I said, there were 7 women on the jury and 5 men on the jury, and deliberations didn't take that long. So the closing arguments were heard on July 3rd and July 4th. Jeff Ashton for the prosecution told the jury, when you have a child, the child becomes your life. This case is about the clash between the responsibility and the expectations that go with it and the life that Casey Anthony wanted to have. Basically, they tried to say that also one of her boyfriends had told her he would never marry her because she had a child. He would never marry someone with a child. And so basically she saw Kaylee as a threat to the life she wanted to have. And that's why she, quote unquote, got rid of her. But then other points during the trial, they also said that she accidentally just medicated her and over-medicated her with chloroform. But here's the thing, she could have used a gazillion other things if that was the case. It could have been Benadryl. It could have been NyQuil or Tylenol PM. Do you know what I mean? So the fact that they tried to tell this jury that she made chloroform, like, it's been proven that you have to basically be a science and have a little science lab, a scientific lab, in order to actually create chloroform. You can't just sit down, print out a recipe, get the ingredients, and put it all together. It doesn't work that way. You literally need a little lab. And Casey did not have a lab, nor did she have a science degree. So like I said, the defense said that Kaylee drowned. They blamed it on, you know, it was an accident, and then that George covered up the accident, and he's the one that in fact put Kaylee to rest, where she was later found on December 11, 2008. So on July 5th, 2011, the jury came back, and let me just read you exactly what it says. The jury began deliberations on July 4th. On July 5th, prosecutors stated that during deliberations, they were about to give the jury corrected information with regard to the Bradley software discrepancy. However, the jury received a verdict before they could do so. One legal analyst stated that if the jury had found Casey guilty before receiving the exculpatory evidence, the prosecution's failure to disclose could have been grounds for a mistrial. So the jury still went to deliberations thinking that there had been 84 searches of chloroform done on that computer. So it would have been basically a Bradley violation.
A Brady violation, sorry.
On the prosecution's side. That's crazy to me. I did not know that until just now. Oh, and by the way, another little nugget of information. The expert pathologist on this case, so the person that, you know, did all the pathology testing, also did the pathology testing for Kennedy and Martin Luther King. So this person was definitely seasoned, if you will. If the jury would have came back with a guilty verdict without that exculpatory evidence, Casey probably still would have gotten off, because this would have been called a mistrial. So to me, that's crazy. I didn't know that till just now. On July 5th, 2011, they found Casey not guilty on counts of capital murder. They found her not guilty on counts of manslaughter and not guilty on child neglect. So Judge Perry sentenced Casey to 1 year in county jail and $1,000 in fines for each of the 4 counts of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, the maximum penalty prescribed by law. So she received 1,043 days credit for time served plus additional credit for good behavior, resulting in her release on July 17th, 2011. So basically, the verdict came in July 5th, 2011, and she was out of there 10 days later. Done. She did spend, I believe, 3 years in prison because she was, you know, being held during that time of her arrest. So in September 2011, Perry, complying with the Florida statute requiring the judges to assess investigative and prosecution costs if requested by the state agency, ruled that Casey Anthony must pay $217,000 to the state of Florida. He ruled she had to pay those costs directly related to lying to law enforcement about the death of Kaylee, including search costs only up to September 30th, 2008, when the sheriff's office stopped investigating the missing child case. In January 2013, a Florida appeals court reduced her convictions from 4 counts to 2 counts. Her attorney had argued that her false statements constituted as a single offense. However, the appeals court noted she gave false information during 2 separate police interviews several hours apart. So basically that's it for this case. It's a very tragic case. So since the end of this trial, there has been a new law enacted called Kaylee's Law, and that basically states that if a parent knows that their child is missing and does not contact the police department to, you know, file a missing child's report, a missing person's report, they can face felony charges. Kaylee's Law would impose stricter requirements on parents to notify law enforcement of the death or disappearance of a child. On such petition, circulated via change.org, has gained nearly 1.3 million electronic signatures. In response to this and other petitions, lawmakers in 4 states, Florida, Oklahoma, New York, and West Virginia, have begun drafting versions of Kaylee's Law. The law in Oklahoma would require a child's parent or guardian to notify police of a missing child within 24 hours and would also stipulate the time frame for notification of the disappearance of a young child under the age of 12. Florida law will make it a felony if a parent or legal guardian fails to report a missing child in a timely manner if they could have known the child may have been in danger. Just so you also know, the meter reader received $15,000 from Good Morning America for his story. ABC News donated $200,000 to Team Casey for baby photos of Kaylee. CBS paid the family $20,000, so they paid Cindy and George $20,000 for all of the family pictures, all of the albums. And one of Casey's ex-boyfriends received $4,000 for the picture of little Kaylee wearing a pink shirt that says "Big Trouble Comes in Small Packages," and apparently that picture was worth a lot of money because that is what she was wearing when she was either murdered or had an accidental death. Okay guys, so that is going to be it for the case of the very tragic death slash possible homicide of Kaylee Marie Anthony, and also the trial of Casey Marie Anthony by not just the court systems, but also by the media and the public. I am curious to know what you guys think, knowing these new details, you know, considering the hair banding. I know the prosecution really tried to push that narrative that the one strand of hair, literally one strand of hair, and they tried to say that it had that death hair banding, but then when they went and talked to scientists, they said that they could alter the pH of either one of our hairs. Like, I could take a piece of hair from my head and alter the pH, and it would also have that similar hair banding, and it would look like it was dead hair, I guess, or came from a dead body, similar to the hair that they found in the trunk. So then we learn that the jury never ever found out that the words "foolproof suffocation" was deleted immediately within 4 hours after the police began to have interest, and when they took Casey to Universal Studios to try and figure out what was going on and trying to find Zanny the nanny. So on one hand, you see that some of the evidence the prosecution presented was kind of like, you know, very circumstantial. Like I said, we could alter our own hair to make it look like it had that death banding as well. And cadaver dogs aren't always 100%, you know, right. And the fact that, you know, there's different things said about the car. First, Casey's mom said it was her vehicle and it had been stolen, and then they call it Casey's vehicle. There's just a lot of inconsistencies in the story that we don't really notice as the trial was going on. At least I didn't, and I followed this case a lot. Like, it was it was all over the news. You could not turn on the news or the internet without hearing the words "top mom." And I do believe that if the prosecution would have pushed for more of a manslaughter verdict rather than just capital murder, death penalty, I think they might have gotten a different verdict. I just really believe that they did not give the jury an opportunity to come back with something other than capital punishment. And yes, they did have those options, but in the closing statements, it really seemed like they were just pushing. Like, if I was on the jury, I would think, well, it's all or nothing. It didn't really seem that there was anything in between. Yes, it was available. They could have gotten her for manslaughter, child endangerment, but they didn't, because it just seems that the prosecution pushed so much for that capital crime, that death penalty sentence. And like one of the jurors said, if I sentenced Casey to death and she did not kill her daughter, I'm no better, I'm also a murderer. And that is what you have to take into account when you think about a trial by jury. Like I said, I think that this trial would have ended up differently. The verdict would have been a little bit different had the jury seen that it does seem that George was not home when those internet searches were getting looked upon, because he had to be at work. His cell service put him at work, and Casey's cell service put her at home when these searches were being made. Now, the foolproof suffocation, that was never even entered into evidence, and the defense had it, but when the prosecution, when they ran their keyword search, they didn't use both. I think it was Mozilla and Google, or they had two different ones they had to look through. They only did the one, and it wasn't in the one browser, it was in the other browser. And apparently it was just because it was a newer employee working on that part of the investigation. They didn't know. It's not like the defense was withholding this evidence from the prosecution. The prosecution just didn't do their due diligence and check all browsers for these specific keywords. That to me is huge. And the fact that all of Casey's internet history was deleted within 4 hours of her first interaction with the police, yeah, to me that shows someone who seems guilty. I do think it's strange that they accused her father of sexual assault or abuse, but that was only in the opening statement. And I feel like now, hindsight, like at the time, as someone, because I went through something similar, not my dad, but like somebody else did that to me when I was a kid. So like you hear that and you immediately feel, because you never want to victim shame or blame. And you always, you know, you don't think that someone's gonna make something like that up. But hindsight, the defense used that in their opening statement, but they never really touched upon that again throughout the trial. I know the prosecution asked him if he would have ever done that to his daughter, and he obviously said, no, I would never hurt my daughter that way. So there's that. So I feel like it was almost like a red herring. I feel like the defense threw that out there as a red herring to get that into the jurors' minds and already have them feel sorry for her. I think if the prosecution had presented all of that to the jury, they probably would have gotten a guilty verdict of at least manslaughter. Here's also the thing that I don't understand. Why did it take the police 3 separate phone calls from this meter reader guy to finally go and really go and investigate where little Kaylee's body was? Why did it take them 3 times? And how come nobody knew about this during the trial? I didn't know about this until I watched these shows that came out after everything has been said and done. One came out in 2017 and one came out in 2018. I don't understand how they missed these pieces of evidence. There's so much. That's why I wanted to definitely cover this case, because there's a lot of information that I didn't know myself. So, knowing all of that, knowing what we know now, what do you guys think? Do you guys still think that she, I mean, I'm not saying that, I feel like most of America thinks that she's guilty. But do you think that the verdict would have been different had this new evidence been entered? You know, like the foolproof suffocation search and the fact that the timestamps were all off. So basically, that is it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for requesting me to do this case, because honestly, I wasn't planning on it because it's a bigger case. It's been done so many times before. But I do like to cover cases that you want me to cover, so I looked into it and I'm really glad that I did, because I found out so much information that I did not know about and I would not have ever known about had you guys not asked me to cover this case. I don't like this case. I don't like any case, obviously. It all breaks my heart. At the end of the day, the biggest victim in this entire thing is poor, sweet little angel, Kaylee Marie Anthony. So my heart and prayers always go with the victims. I mean, absolutely no disrespect when covering these cases. Again, these are just tales of caution. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments down below again what you guys think. If you learned anything new from my video presenting this case to you guys. And also please, if you have any other case suggestions, let me know in the comments down below. Please remember to always be kind to yourself and others, and I will see you guys in my next video, which will be very soon. I love you so much. Mwah. Bye.